September 1939. The invasion of Poland was not merely the start of World War II. It was the proving ground for a revolutionary, terrifying, and globally defining military doctrine, the Blitzkrieg, Lightning War. For the German High Command, this campaign was the first non-negotiable test of their new strategic thesis, a complete rejection of the static, attritional trench warfare that had consumed a generation in the Great War. The German Panzers, armored spearheads of a fully motorized army, advanced across the Polish border with a calculated confidence, believing their speed, synchronization, and air superiority would guarantee a swift, surgical, and total victory within weeks. The world watched, unknowingly witnessing the birth of modern mechanized warfare and the immediate terrifying manifestation of total aggressive conflict. The core of the Blitzkrieg doctrine was predicated on speed and psychological shock. It mandated the rapid, deep penetration of enemy lines by massive concentrations of armored units, bypassing fortified strongpoints and severing communication links. This armored thrust was to be immediately supported by close air support from the Luftwaffe, primarily the devastating Stuka dive bombers, which acted as flying artillery to annihilate any localized resistance or slow the enemy's capacity for rapid mobilization. The operational goal was not the grinding reduction of territory, but the paralysis of the enemy command structure and the encirclement of their field armies before a cohesive defense could be organized. The Polish military, operating largely under outdated doctrines rooted in horse cavalry and linear defense, was considered an easy, predictable target for this new, integrated form of attack. The German confidence was immense, rooted in their overwhelming material superiority in armor and air power, and the geographical advantage of having Poland almost entirely encircled by German-held territory, including Nazi-allied Slovakia and the newly conquered Czechoslovakia. The invasion was launched from multiple axes simultaneously, designed to immediately confuse and fragment the Polish mobilization effort. The strategic vision was a rapid pincer movement that would meet deep in the Polish interior, annihilating the Polish field armies in vast encirclement battles, ensuring that the country's resistance would collapse before any significant international intervention could be mobilized. However, the reality awaiting the advancing panzer divisions quickly complicated the meticulous German planning. The weather, the inherent difficulty of the Eastern European road network, and, most importantly, the fierce, unexpected Polish resistance immediately introduced elements of chaos and attrition that the Blitzkrieg doctrine was designed to avoid. The initial German confidence, while tactically justified in many sectors, was quickly tempered by the unexpected tenacity of the Polish defense. The advance was not always the smooth, effortless triumph predicted in the High Command's war games. It was a brutal, chaotic collision of two fundamentally different military eras, where German technological superiority was met by the fierce, localized sacrifice of the Polish soldier. The thesis of terror was proven, but the cost was immediately higher, and the confusion more profound than the confident commanders had anticipated. The initial hours and days of the German invasion were a period of immense tactical shock and total confusion, revealing the profound, unexpected friction generated by the Polish defense and the treacherous, unforgiving terrain. The Polish army, despite its structural and material disadvantages, proved far more determined, organized, and tactically adaptive than the confident German commanders had anticipated. The Blitzkrieg was not a bloodless surgical operation. It was immediately transformed into a chaotic, high-cost collision. The primary physical impediment to the German advance was the Polish road network and the onset of the autumnal rains. The roads, often unpaved and rudimentary, quickly succumbed to the heavy, continuous traffic of the German armored divisions, turning into thick, sucking quagmires of mud. The powerful German tanks and supply trucks designed for the asphalt highways of Western Europe immediately struggled against this Rasputitsa-like environment, slowing the critical operational tempo of the Blitzkrieg. This environmental friction guaranteed that the German army's inherent logistical vulnerability was exposed at the earliest possible stage. A silent, implacable resistance that defied the sophisticated German planning. The Polish tactical response, often misunderstood by later history, was characterized by fierce, localized defensive pockets and counterattacks. While their massive, heroic cavalry charges against German armor are often cited as symbols of tragic anachronism, the core of the Polish defense was the determined resistance of infantry and anti-tank units. Polish commanders utilized the dense forests, rivers, and urban centers to establish ambushes, inflict heavy casualties on the German infantry, and force the German panzers into costly clearance operations. The defense of Westerplatte, the battles in the Polish corridor, and the localized counterattacks demonstrated a tactical commitment that shattered the German illusion of an easy, immediate surrender. The German forces found themselves fighting for every mile, facing determined resistance that consumed their fuel and materiel reserves far faster than anticipated. The immense initial success of the Blitzkrieg, the rapid territorial gain and the initial encirclement maneuvers, masked a profound internal friction within the German mechanized columns. The immense speed of the armored thrusts often outran their own logistical tail and their supporting infantry, leaving the panzers vulnerable to Polish localized counterattacks and ambush. Furthermore, the immense volume of refugees and retreating Polish military units fleeing the relentless advance choked the main German supply routes, adding another layer of unpredicted chaos and logistical complication that further slowed the crucial operational tempo. The German army was winning the territorial battle, but it was fighting a logistical and attritional war that was immediately more costly and confused than the strategic plan had accounted for. The invasion was a shock to the invaded, but the unexpected ferocity of the encounter was a shock to the invader as well. Attention, General Staff! You've witnessed the brutal birth of the Blitzkrieg, a shock compounded by the initial chaos and the unexpected ferocity of the Polish defense. The speed was there, but so was the unexpected mud and the unyielding resistance. If the strategic complexity of this collision of eras resonates with your analysis, then do not let the friction stall our mission. Subscribe now and commit to analyzing the battles where doctrine met the unpredictable chaos of the front line. And here is your tactical query. Was the greatest initial shock to the German advance the unexpected durability of the Polish anti-tank weaponry, or the debilitating effect of the muddy road network? Drop your strategic assessment in the comments below. Let the historical debate define the cost of the first shot. The strategic success of the German territorial advance was immediately overshadowed by the devastating, systematic logistical collapse that plagued the Wehrmacht throughout the Polish campaign. This failure, though mitigated by the campaign's short duration, exposed the profound structural weakness that would later prove fatal on the Eastern Front. The fundamental inability of the German supply system to sustain the relentless high-speed demands of the Blitzkrieg across hostile, underdeveloped infrastructure. The logistical crisis began with the primary German assumption that the existing Polish infrastructure could be rapidly seized and utilized to support the advance. This assumption was shattered by the simple fact of underdeveloped road and rail networks. The German reliance on motorization, trucks, and specialized transport was immediately handicapped by the rudimentary unpaved roads that quickly became impassable under the weight of the panzers and the autumnal rains. The trucks designed for European highways broke down at an accelerating rate, creating immense bottlenecks that paralyzed the movement of fuel, ammunition, and food to the forward fighting units. The railroad network, the only viable means of transporting the massive bulk supplies required, was compromised by both the Polish scorched earth policy and the sheer speed of the German advance. The Polish military, in their defensive retreat, executed targeted demolitions of key rail bridges, junctions, and rolling stock, denying the Germans the capacity for rapid resupply. The German rail conversion teams, essential for supporting the advance into Polish territory, where the rail gauge differed from the German standard, could not possibly keep pace with the swift armored thrusts. The massive lag between the fighting front and the functional railhead forced the Wehrmacht to rely on the inherently fragile, slow, and unsustainable truck convoys, turning the entire logistical operation into a chaotic mirage. This logistical paralysis meant that the powerful, fast-moving German armored units were constantly operating on the very edge of fuel and ammunition exhaustion. Tanks had to be constantly rationed, limiting their maneuverability and undermining the core strategic principle of the Blitzkrieg: non-stop motion. The German command focused relentlessly on the final strategic objective, the annihilation of the Polish armies, was forced to continuously divert fighting units to purely logistical security roles, guarding the vulnerable supply routes against Polish resistance and desperate localized counterattacks. The legacy of the logistical collapse in Poland remains a critical, final testament to the structural flaws of the Blitzkrieg doctrine. While the short duration of the campaign prevented the collapse from becoming terminal, as it would in 1941, the initial strategic shock was a definitive warning. The German army could defeat the enemy on the field, but it struggled fundamentally to defeat the immense, silent resistance of distance, terrain, and the logistical burden of its own speed. The logistical collapse was the first unassailable weakness that guaranteed the ultimate failure of Germany's grand strategic vision. The Polish defense of September 1939 was defined by an impossible strategic dilemma: how to counter a revolutionary doctrine like the Blitzkrieg with an army structured for the warfare of a previous era, while simultaneously facing the existential threat of German encirclement and the impending Soviet invasion. The Polish High Command was fighting not just a military battle, but a geopolitical and technological conflict that was fundamentally stacked against them. The immediate strategic challenge was the German multi-axis attack. The simultaneous invasions from the north, west, and south were designed to immediately fragment the Polish mobilization efforts and sever their communication lines, forcing the Polish armies into isolated, uncoordinated defensive pockets. The Polish defense doctrine, centered on forward deployment along the extensive, vulnerable borders, was immediately outflanked by the speed and depth of the German armored thrusts. The strategic necessity to defend the entire border area, coupled with the commitment of forces to the vulnerable Polish corridor, meant that the Polish army was dangerously dispersed, incapable of forming the deep, concentrated defensive lines necessary to absorb the shock of the panzers. The second strategic constraint was the lack of anti-tank firepower and air cover. The Polish army possessed insufficient numbers of modern anti-tank guns and a critically obsolete air force, which was rapidly neutralized by the superior number and technology of the German Luftwaffe. The dominance of the German air power ensured that Polish ground movement was constantly harassed and that the necessary defensive mobilization was severely disrupted. The Polish army was fighting the most sophisticated form of mechanized warfare without the necessary tools to counter it effectively. The final, fatal blow was the geopolitical reality: the impending, inevitable Soviet invasion from the east. The Polish High Command was forced to continuously hold back crucial reserve forces, anticipating the Soviet aggression mandated by the secret Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The Soviet invasion on September 17, 1939, delivered the final, fatal strategic blow, eliminating any final hope for a sustained defense or a coordinated retreat to a secure defensive perimeter in the southeast. The Soviet aggression transformed the German offensive from a high-cost military challenge into an existential, two-front annihilation. The Polish strategic dilemma was thus one of tragic inevitability. Their immense courage and localized resistance were tactically superb, but the fundamental imbalance of material, technology, and geopolitics was insurmountable. The army fought bravely, inflicting higher casualties and enduring longer than the German commanders had anticipated, but the structural flaws of their doctrine and the immense coordinated attack from both east and west guaranteed the military collapse. The tragic resistance of Poland remains a profound testament to the courage of a nation forced to fight an impossible, predetermined conflict. Attention, forward scouts. You've witnessed Poland's impossible choice, fighting a technological war on two fronts. Their courage was absolute, but the odds were insurmountable. If the strategic cruelty of this initial conflict resonates with your understanding of the war's geopolitical start, then do not let the story be silenced. Subscribe now and commit to analyzing the campaigns where geopolitical reality dictated the outcome. And here is your tactical query. Was the biggest flaw in the Polish defense their reliance on a static border defense or the complete lack of modern anti-tank weaponry? Drop your strategic assessment in the comments below. Let the historical debate define the cost of an outdated doctrine. The immense operational success of the Blitzkrieg in Poland was purchased at a significant, often overlooked human price, a cost that extended far beyond the immediate devastating Polish military casualties. The chaotic nature of the invasion, the relentless operational tempo, and the initial unexpected friction suffered by the German forces inflicted immense, systemic damage on the Wehrmacht itself, exposing the fragility of its seemingly unstoppable war machine. The primary cost to the Wehrmacht was the consumption of irreplaceable materiel. The initial German confidence led to high-risk maneuvers and aggressive assaults that, coupled with the treacherous road network and Polish resistance, resulted in high rates of tank and vehicle breakdown. Tanks that stalled in the mud or were damaged by Polish anti-tank fire consumed precious fuel and spare parts that the collapsing logistical system could not easily replace. This initial consumption of tanks, trucks, and specialized transport units, though not immediately fatal, became a significant strategic drain that would later amplify the irreversible logistical collapse on the Eastern Front. The Blitzkrieg was cannibalizing its own resources. The human cost for the German soldier was one of relentless operational stress and physical exhaustion. The core principle of the Blitzkrieg, non-stop motion, meant that the German infantry and armored crews were constantly pushed to the limits of their endurance, deprived of sleep and operating under immense pressure. This relentless tempo, coupled with the difficulty of maintaining a cohesive supply line, resulted in high rates of non-combat casualties due to fatigue, illness, and the brutal conditions of the primitive road network. The German army was winning the territorial battle, but it was suffering a rapid, systemic erosion of its operational capacity. The immense Polish civilian casualty rate, resulting from the sheer speed and brutality of the German advance and the systematic targeting of infrastructure by the Luftwaffe, added a profound ethical and moral cost to the operation. The German commitment to total war meant that the distinction between military and civilian targets was often blurred, creating a psychological impact that would later define the ethical landscape of the entire conflict. The Blitzkrieg was not a clean war. It was immediately and irrevocably a war of atrocity and total destruction. The final strategic cost of the Blitzkrieg was the strategic miscalculation it instilled in the German high command. The rapid victory in Poland, though structurally flawed, confirmed their belief in the invincibility of their new doctrine, leading to the fateful decision to apply the same logistical and operational model to the vast, insurmountable distances of the Soviet Union. The Polish campaign, therefore, was a strategic victory that provided the German high command with the perfect fatal illusion that would ultimately guarantee their total, irreversible defeat. The immense human cost of the Blitzkrieg was the down payment on the final, tragic strategic error. Final command assessment. You've tracked the immense human and logistical cost of the Blitzkrieg in Poland, a victory that was also a profound strategic miscalculation. If the tragic irony of this flawed triumph resonates with your analysis, do not let the history be forgotten. Subscribe now and commit to analyzing the campaigns where success was the seed of ultimate failure. And here is your final intelligence task. Suggest the next campaign defined by a flawed strategic premise, a battle where initial success led to ultimate collapse. For our deep dive analysis, your suggestions guide our strategic mission. The rapid collapse of the Polish defenses was fundamentally secured by the novel and terrifying implementation of the German air power doctrine, a systematic, coordinated utilization of the Luftwaffe that was fully integrated into the Blitzkrieg ground operations. The undisputed control of the Polish skies and the devastating efficiency of the Stuka dive bombers provided the German armored spearheads with the necessary psychological and material superiority to shatter the Polish lines. The Luftwaffe doctrine was built on the core principle of close air support, acting as flying artillery to annihilate any localized resistance, clear obstacles, and sever enemy communication links immediately ahead of the advancing panzers. This total air superiority meant that the Polish army was constantly subjected to attack from above, unable to mobilize reserves effectively, or concentrate defensive firepower without drawing immediate, devastating air retaliation. The psychological effect of the Stuka dive bomber, with its terrifying siren and precision bombing, was immense, often breaking the morale of Polish units before the ground assault even commenced. The strategic consequence of this air dominance was the paralysis of Polish command and mobilization. The Luftwaffe systematically targeted Polish airfields, destroying the critically obsolete Polish Air Force in the first hours of the invasion, and guaranteeing undisputed control of the skies. They then targeted Polish rail lines, bridges, and communication centers, ensuring that the Polish High Command could not effectively coordinate its dispersed armies or mobilize the necessary reserves. The Blitzkrieg was a successful, integrated attack on the Polish body politic, severing the nerve center that controlled the army. The German air power doctrine also played a critical role in the destruction of the logistical capacity of the Polish defense. By targeting bridges and rail lines, the Luftwaffe amplified the infrastructure weakness, ensuring that the Polish armies, already struggling with outdated transport, could not move their forces or their supplies effectively. This systematic logistical strangulation was the necessary precondition for the rapid encirclement maneuvers executed by the panzers. The Polish campaign served as the ultimate chilling proof of the effectiveness of the new integrated air power doctrine. The seamless synchronization of air and ground forces guaranteed the speed and depth of the German advance, transforming the initial strategic dilemma of the Polish defense into an insurmountable existential catastrophe. The Stuka's reign of terror was the silent, brutal weapon that guaranteed the success of the Blitzkrieg and established the terrifying new standard for aerial warfare. The tragedy of the Polish campaign is often symbolized by the cavalry and the collapse, the heartbreaking yet often misunderstood commitment of the Polish army's cavalry brigades against the modern mechanized might of the German panzers. While often portrayed as a futile, romantic gesture of an army refusing to modernize, the use of cavalry in 1939 was a nuanced, pragmatic, and ultimately doomed response to the unique constraints of the Polish theater. The Polish army maintained numerous cavalry brigades not out of a belief in their capacity to defeat modern tanks, but because they were the army's most mobile, versatile, and experienced fighting units. In a country severely lacking in paved roads, heavy motorization, and modern communications, the horse-mounted soldier provided the necessary speed and flexibility to execute reconnaissance, screen disorganized retreats, and engage in quick, localized counterattacks and ambush in the densely forested or rough terrain, roles for which the German motorized infantry was often too slow. The cavalry was a logistical necessity, not a strategic choice. The famous tragic encounters, where Polish cavalry allegedly charged directly at German tanks, were often the result of localized tactical confusion and miscommunication. The core doctrine of the Polish cavalry was to fight mounted but dismounted against armor, utilizing the limited anti-tank weaponry they possessed. However, the immense speed of the Blitzkrieg, the chaos of the front, and the lack of communication often forced these highly mobile units into direct, unavoidable confrontations with the armored spearheads, resulting in catastrophic casualties. The cavalry's bravery was absolute, but the technological disparity was insurmountable. The true strategic significance of the Polish cavalry was in their role as rearguard and screening forces. They fought fiercely and continuously, attempting to cover the mobilization of the main Polish armies and the evacuation of crucial government and military assets. Their high-cost defense, though unable to stop the panzers, bought precious hours that allowed some Polish units to escape encirclement and continue the fight in isolated pockets. The immense sacrifice of the Polish cavalry was a testament to the soldiers' unwavering commitment to duty, even in the face of military annihilation. The legacy of the cavalry remains a poignant symbol of the tragedy of anachronism, the fate of a brave, determined army forced to fight a technological and operational conflict for which they lacked the fundamental material tools. The sacrifice of the Polish cavalry underscored the brutal efficiency of the Blitzkrieg and the high price paid by any nation caught between military eras. Their defeat was not a failure of courage, but a failure of industrial capacity and modern doctrine. The Polish campaign, which began with the speed of the Blitzkrieg, found its desperate, agonizing conclusion in the protracted siege of Warsaw. The defense of the capital became the symbolic and physical focal point of the final Polish resistance, a brutal urban crucible that demonstrated the Polish resolve to continue the fight long after the structural defeat of their field armies. The siege of Warsaw was defined by urban attrition and German logistical frustration. The Polish garrison, composed of regular army units, militia, and armed civilians, organized a fierce, disciplined defense of the city, utilizing the dense urban environment to neutralize the mobility advantage of the German panzers. The German army, unable to swiftly maneuver its armored columns through the labyrinthine streets and facing fierce, localized resistance from every building, was forced into a slow, costly, and brutal war of urban clearance, a type of warfare that the Blitzkrieg doctrine was explicitly designed to avoid. The German response was characterized by overwhelming air and artillery bombardment. The Luftwaffe and heavy artillery systematically pounded the city, targeting infrastructure, communication centers, and civilian areas, attempting to break the will of the defenders and force a rapid capitulation. The intense shelling and bombing inflicted immense destruction on the city and catastrophic civilian casualties, but the Polish defense, fueled by fierce patriotism and a commitment to fight until the end, remained unyielding for weeks. The immense frustration of the German command was rooted in the logistical bottleneck created by the siege. The need to commit vast armored and infantry reserves to reduce the city, coupled with the immense consumption of ammunition and fuel, disrupted the German operational tempo and consumed resources needed elsewhere. The Polish defense, while strategically doomed, achieved the tactical goal of inflicting high cost and consuming significant German time and materiel reserves. The surrender of Warsaw on September 28, 1939, marked the end of the organized military resistance in Poland. The city's fierce defense served as a powerful symbol of Polish defiance against the immense coordinated aggression of the German and Soviet invaders. The urban crucible confirmed that the Blitzkrieg, while unstoppable in the open field, could be slowed and bled by disciplined, localized urban resistance. The immense sacrifice of the Warsaw defenders remains a powerful testament to the moral fortitude of a nation fighting an impossible, existential conflict. Attention, urban warfare specialists. You've witnessed the brutalizing slowdown of the Blitzkrieg in the Warsaw Crucible, a siege won by overwhelming fire, not maneuver. If the immense cost and tactical complexity of urban defense resonate with your analysis, then do not let the rubble obscure the truth. Subscribe now and commit to analyzing the campaigns where cities became fortresses. And here is your tactical query. What was the biggest strategic benefit of the Warsaw defense? The moral boost it gave the Polish people, or the amount of time and materiel it forced the German high command to consume? Drop your strategic assessment in the comments below. Let the historical debate define urban resilience. The military conquest of Poland was swiftly followed by the systematic annexation and partition of the country between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, marking the immediate, terrifying transition from a state of military conflict to a brutal, prolonged occupation, defined by systematic terror and the scars of total war. The German victory in the field was immediately leveraged into an ideological and existential struggle for the future of the Polish nation. The German occupation of Western Poland was characterized by immediate, ruthless ethnic cleansing and ideological repression. The Nazi regime viewed Poland as a source of Lebensraum, living space, and its population as racially inferior, leading to the systematic execution of the Polish intelligentsia, clergy, and political elite, the leadership class essential for maintaining national identity and cohesion. This campaign of terror was designed to dismantle the Polish state structure and pave the way for German colonization, a final brutal confirmation of the ideological motivations that underpinned the Blitzkrieg. The economic aftermath was equally devastating. The German military and civilian administrations systematically plundered the Polish economy, seizing food, raw materials, and industrial assets to fuel the German war effort. The Polish population was subjected to forced labor, extreme rationing, and a constant pervasive atmosphere of terror and violence. The speed and efficiency of the German military conquest were swiftly followed by the total, systemic brutality of the occupation regime, confirming that the war was not merely about territorial gain, but about total political and ethnic restructuring. The scars of the military campaign were visible in the destruction of the infrastructure. The systematic bombing of cities and the methodical demolition of bridges and rail lines, initially intended to secure the military victory, left a massive long-term legacy of physical ruin. The German military, having suffered immensely from the logistical weaknesses of the Polish infrastructure during the campaign, was forced to dedicate vast resources to repairing and converting the rail lines to support the continuous movement of forces and supplies for the subsequent Western campaigns and the coming invasion of the Soviet Union. The annexation and the aftermath of the Polish campaign served as a grim, essential lesson in the total nature of the conflict. The speed of the Blitzkrieg provided the German regime with the necessary political and military cover to launch a campaign of systematic terror and ideological conquest, guaranteeing that the final, decisive battles of the war would be fought not merely between armies, but between entire opposing systems of government and ideology. The scars left on the Polish landscape and the Polish population were the final, profound human cost of the initial, overwhelming strategic surprise. The lasting legacy of the invasion of Poland is a crucial, profound strategic lesson. The fundamental logistical flaw that defined the Blitzkrieg and guaranteed the ultimate failure of Germany's grand strategic vision. While the doctrine achieved stunning tactical and territorial success, the Polish campaign immediately exposed the structural weaknesses that would later consume the German Wehrmacht entirely on the Eastern Front. The core legacy is the confirmation of the primacy of logistics over maneuver. The Blitzkrieg relied on speed, but the Polish terrain and infrastructure immediately penalized that speed, exposing the German armored divisions to logistical strangulation and breakdown. The reliance on the enemy's resources and the failure to account for the primitive nature of the Polish road and rail networks were fatal strategic miscalculations. The logistical strain suffered in Poland was the initial, definitive warning that the Blitzkrieg model was fundamentally unsustainable across vast, underdeveloped territories. The second legacy is the definitive proof of the unsustainability of material consumption. The aggressive, high-risk maneuvers of the Polish campaign, coupled with the unexpected friction and breakdown, consumed irreplaceable tanks, trucks, and specialized spare parts at an unsustainable rate. The immense speed of the advance guaranteed that the logistical tail could not keep pace, resulting in the rapid consumption of the German army's operational reserves. The Polish campaign was a short, brutal strategic victory that consumed the seeds of Germany's long-term material capacity. The third legacy is the tragic triumph of the Polish resistance. The immense sacrifice of the Polish soldier, fighting against the overwhelming material and geopolitical odds, served as the initial, critical friction that exposed the Blitzkrieg's weaknesses. Their localized, fierce defense consumed precious German time and materiel, delaying the full deployment of the Wehrmacht and providing the world with the first terrifying glimpse of the total existential nature of the conflict. The Polish campaign proved that even the most advanced military doctrine can be successfully slowed and bled by unyielding human courage and tactical tenacity. The final legacy of the invasion of Poland is that of a strategic paradox, a spectacular, history-defining military victory that simultaneously contained the seeds of ultimate total defeat. The structural flaws exposed in the logistical chain and the operational model in September 1939 were the non-negotiable strategic constraints that would ultimately guarantee the catastrophic consumption of the entire German war machine across the vast distances of the Eastern Front. The swift military conquest of Poland was immediately followed by a desperate, massive effort, the Railroad War, a grinding, logistical conflict fought by German engineers and labor units against the fundamental incompatibility of the Polish and German rail systems. This unforeseen operational bottleneck exposed the German High Command's profound failure to account for the critical infrastructural differences that would fatally compromise the movement of bulk supplies. The core of the conflict was the gauge conversion dilemma. Polish railroads utilized a different gauge, track width, than the German standard, rendering German locomotives and rolling stock entirely unusable on the captured network. To sustain the subsequent advances into Western Europe, and critically the future movements towards the Eastern Front, the German engineers were immediately tasked with the slow, labor-intensive process of physically widening or narrowing the entire Polish rail network, a monumental logistical undertaking that defied the speed of the Blitzkrieg. The speed of the advance created an immediate, insurmountable logistical lag. The German armored spearheads were advancing hundreds of miles ahead of the functional converted railheads, forcing the Wehrmacht to rely entirely on the unreliable, slow, and unsustainable road transport for the movement of essential supplies. This gap was the first major strategic choke point, consuming vast amounts of fuel and precious vehicle life simply to move supplies across the final crucial miles to the front line. The gauge conversion teams could not possibly keep pace with the fighting forces. The strategic consequences of the Railroad War were immediate and long-lasting. The logistical bottleneck severely restricted the German capacity for rapid troop and materiel deployment, preventing the swift, massive concentration of forces that the Blitzkrieg required. Furthermore, the immense commitment of German engineering and labor resources to this conversion process diverted crucial assets from other vital operational theaters, amplifying the systemic weaknesses of the entire German logistical structure. The immense effort required to repair and convert the rail lines consumed precious time that the German command desperately needed to consolidate its gains. The Polish campaign served as a harsh, defining lesson. Infrastructure dictates mobility. The German failure to anticipate and compensate for the fundamental rail gauge differential was a catastrophic strategic oversight that provided the first clear warning of the insurmountable logistical barriers that awaited the Wehrmacht on the even vaster, more complex rail system of the Soviet Union. The Railroad War in Poland was the final initial proof that the logistical foundation of the German military machine was fatally flawed. The immense speed of the military conquest of Poland was immediately followed by the systematic economic price, a brutal, comprehensive campaign of seizure, plunder, and economic repression designed to fuel the German war effort and execute the ideological program of the Nazi regime. The annexation of Polish territory was swiftly followed by the total economic exploitation of the nation, marking the transition from military occupation to systematic colonization. The primary objective was total economic integration and resource seizure. The German civilian and military administrations systematically plundered the Polish economy, seizing massive stockpiles of food, raw materials, and industrial machinery for shipment back to Germany. Polish factories and industries were either dismantled and moved west or brought under German control and utilized solely to support the German military machine. This systematic economic strangulation was designed to strip Poland of its independent economic capacity and directly fuel the German war effort. The human cost of this economic price was immense. The Polish population was immediately subjected to extreme labor and rationing policies. Vast numbers of Polish citizens were conscripted for forced labor, both within Poland and in Germany, providing a massive, cheap labor pool for the German industrial and agricultural sectors. The forced labor system, coupled with the systematic seizure of food and essential goods, led to immediate, widespread hardship, starvation, and disease among the Polish civilian population. The economic exploitation was a direct, brutal act of ideological repression. The immense wealth seized from the conquered Polish territories provided a temporary but significant logistical and material boost to the German war machine. The captured rail rolling stock, industrial output, and agricultural surplus were quickly integrated into the German supply chain, providing a necessary, temporary offset to the material drain of the initial military campaign. This massive plunder operation, while strategically significant, was achieved through the systematic destruction of the Polish economy and the ruthless repression of its population. The economic price paid by Poland confirmed the total existential nature of the conflict. The Blitzkrieg was not merely a territorial war. It was an ideological war of total economic and ethnic restructuring. The systematic seizure and plunder of the Polish economy served as the initial grim template for the economic exploitation that the Nazi regime intended to execute across the entire continent, a final confirmation that the military victory was merely the precondition for a total war of economic subjugation. Attention, economic analysts, you've tracked the immense cost of the German military victory, a swift plunder that fueled the Blitzkrieg but destroyed an entire nation. If the strategic role of economic exploitation and logistical resource seizure resonates with your analysis, then do not let the truth be lost in the transfer. Subscribe now and commit to analyzing the campaigns where economic reality dictated the cost of war. And here is your tactical query. Was the greatest logistical benefit to Germany from the Polish campaign the captured agricultural resources or the seizure of Polish industrial rail equipment? Drop your strategic assessment in the comments below. Let the historical debate define economic warfare. The immense speed of the military conquest of Poland was immediately accompanied by a campaign of systematic war crimes and ideological terror, embedding profound ethical scars into the conflict from its very inception. The Blitzkrieg provided the necessary military cover for the immediate execution of the Nazi ideological program, transforming the military occupation into a campaign of deliberate, systematic repression and mass murder. The German High Command, operating under the explicit directives of the Nazi regime, systematically targeted the Polish intellectual and leadership class, the clergy, teachers, political elite, and intelligentsia, in a deliberate campaign of mass execution, intelligence action. This ideological terror was designed to decapitate the Polish state, destroying the capacity for national resistance and paving the way for German colonization. The speed of the military advance guaranteed that these systematic killings were executed rapidly and ruthlessly, avoiding any significant international scrutiny. The brutality against the civilian population was immense and widespread. The systematic bombing of cities, the destruction of infrastructure, and the indiscriminate shooting of civilians suspected of partisan activity were immediate consequences of the German commitment to total war and the disregard for the laws of armed conflict. The initial clashes between Polish military resistance and German armored columns often devolved into brutal reprisals against the local population, further fueling the atmosphere of terror. The moral burden of these war crimes fell on both the ideological SS units and the professional Wehrmacht. While the SS units were the primary executors of the ideological terror, the Wehrmacht, committed to securing the rapid military victory, often tolerated or indirectly facilitated the atrocities, focusing relentlessly on the operational objective. This systemic failure to uphold the moral and legal framework of warfare cemented the profound ethical decay that defined the German military occupation. The legacy of the ethical scars remains an indelible, chilling testament to the total existential nature of the conflict. The systematic war crimes committed in Poland were not merely tactical aberrations. They were a deliberate, calculated component of the Nazi ideological program, transforming the military conquest into a campaign of systematic terror and ideological extermination. The immense scale of the human suffering and the systemic nature of the atrocities cemented the profound moral justification for the final, total Allied commitment to the annihilation of the Nazi regime. While the main Polish armies were systematically encircled and defeated in the open field, the defense of isolated fortified positions, the final fortress, provided a desperate, high-cost resistance that consumed valuable German time and materiel. The defense of the Modlin Fortress, a massive strategic structure situated at the confluence of the Vistula and Bug rivers, stands as the ultimate symbol of the unyielding Polish refusal to surrender. The Modlin Fortress, a massive historic military installation, was transformed into the final desperate stronghold of the Polish defense. The garrison, composed of regular army units, artillery, and specialized engineers, organized a fierce, disciplined defense, utilizing the vast fortifications to neutralize the German capacity for rapid armored maneuver. The German forces, unable to swiftly reduce the massive entrenched structure, were forced into a costly, time-consuming siege operation, consuming the very momentum that the Blitzkrieg was designed to preserve. The tactical significance of Modlin was immense. Its defense forced the German High Command to commit massive artillery and infantry reserves, including specialized siege units, to reduce the fortress, diverting these crucial resources from the ongoing urban siege of Warsaw and the final operational maneuvers. The prolonged resistance of the Modlin garrison, enduring relentless air and artillery bombardment, inflicted significant casualties on the attacking German forces and consumed precious time that the German timetable could not afford. The surrender of Modlin on September 29, 1939, marked the symbolic and physical end of the organized military resistance in Poland. The tenacity of the defense, enduring for weeks after the collapse of the Polish field armies, became a powerful, enduring testament to the moral fortitude of the Polish soldier. The Modlin campaign confirmed that the Blitzkrieg, while unstoppable in the open field, could be effectively checked and bled by disciplined, localized resistance operating from prepared, fortified positions. The legacy of the final fortress remains a poignant symbol of the courage of strategic defiance. The immense sacrifice of the Modlin garrison, enduring long after the strategic inevitability of defeat had been established, confirmed the profound moral justification for the Allied commitment to the eventual liberation of Poland. The battle was a final, clear statement that the Polish nation would continue its resistance, despite the overwhelming forces arrayed against it. The rapid military conquest of Poland, while a spectacular display of military modernization, immediately yielded profound strategic lessons that would dictate the course of the subsequent European war, confirming the decisive roles of air power, targeted sabotage, and the devastating aftermath of total war. The Polish campaign served as the ultimate brutal military laboratory for the global conflict that followed. The first and most enduring lesson was the primacy of integrated air power. The seamless synchronization of the Luftwaffe and the armored forces provided the necessary speed and destructive capacity to shatter the Polish lines and sever communication links. The campaign confirmed that air superiority was the non-negotiable precondition for modern mechanized warfare, transforming the battlefield and paralyzing the enemy's capacity for mobilization. The second lesson was the effectiveness of targeted sabotage. The Polish attempts to demolish key rail bridges and infrastructure, though ultimately overcome by the sheer speed of the German advance, confirmed the profound vulnerability of the Blitzkrieg to logistical disruption. The destruction of transport links and the infrastructure created a logistical lag that immediately exposed the fundamental weakness of the German supply chain, a lesson that would later be ruthlessly and systematically applied by the Soviets on the Eastern Front. The third lesson was the impossibility of strategic neutrality. The Soviet invasion on September 17 confirmed the lethal geopolitical reality that the conflict was not a localized war, but an existential struggle for the future of the continent. The complete disregard for the laws of war, the systematic ideological terror, and the total economic exploitation of the conquered territory cemented the moral and ethical landscape of the entire conflict. The final strategic cost of the Polish campaign was the fatal overconfidence it instilled in the German High Command. The speed and ease of the victory confirmed their belief in the invincibility of the Blitzkrieg, leading to the subsequent catastrophic decision to apply the same structurally flawed logistical model to the vast, insurmountable distances of the Soviet Union. The strategic lessons learned in Poland were critical and correct, But the final human error of overconfidence amplified the structural flaws into a total, irreversible strategic failure. The invasion and rapid conquest of Poland sent an immediate geopolitical shockwave across the globe, fundamentally altering the existing power structure and dragging the major world powers into a total, existential conflict. The speed and brutality of the Blitzkrieg served as a terrifying demonstration of the German military's capabilities, forcing the Western Allies to confront the total commitment required to oppose the Nazi regime. The most immediate consequence was the declaration of war by Britain and France. Bound by their mutual defense treaties with Poland, the Western Allies were forced to honor their commitment, formally transforming the localized military conflict into the Second World War. This declaration, though initially lacking in immediate, decisive military action against the German Wehrmacht, solidified the geopolitical lines of the subsequent conflict, confirming that the war would be fought against a determined coalition of nations. The geopolitical shock was amplified by the Soviet invasion and partition of Poland. The Soviet aggression, mandated by the secret Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, confirmed the cynical, brutal realpolitik that underpinned the conflict. The partition of Poland, achieved through the coordinated aggression of two totalitarian regimes, was a clear signal that the conflict was not merely about territorial adjustments, but about the total political and ideological restructuring of Eastern Europe. This act immediately placed the Soviet Union in a complex, ambiguous strategic position, both a victor and a potential future target of the Nazi war machine. The shockwave also catalyzed massive strategic and military rearmament in the West. The terrifying effectiveness of the Blitzkrieg provided a grim, unassailable blueprint for the required military modernization. Britain and France were forced to rapidly accelerate the development of armored forces, anti-tank technology, and a modernized air force capable of countering the new German doctrine. The immense logistical and industrial demands of this massive rearmament effort immediately began to reshape the economies and industrial output of the Allied nations. The legacy of the geopolitical shockwave remains a profound testament to the irreversible nature of total war. The speed and brutality of the Blitzkrieg left the world with no option but to commit to a total, sustained conflict. The immense speed of the German victory shattered the illusions of a contained war, guaranteeing that the final, decisive battles would be fought across the entire globe and consuming the resources and lives of entire generations. The German military victory in Poland was immediately followed by a massive, high-cost effort of infrastructure reconstruction, a systematic campaign by German engineers and labor units to repair and convert the Polish rail and road networks to support the logistics of the subsequent military campaigns in the West. This immense operational burden was the immediate strategic price paid for the rapid territorial conquest. The primary task was the gauge conversion of the Polish rail network. The German military, recognizing the absolute necessity of rail transport for the movement of bulk supplies and materiel, committed vast resources to physically widening the Polish rail lines to the German standard. This arduous, labor-intensive process was carried out under immense time pressure, fueled by the imminent need to transport the German armored divisions and logistical support units westward for the planned invasion of France. The speed of the conversion was a non-negotiable factor in the German strategic timeline. The infrastructure reconstruction was also focused on repairing the demolished bridges and rail junctions. The Polish scorched earth policy, though unable to halt the Blitzkrieg, had effectively targeted the most vulnerable points of the rail network. German engineers were forced into a continuous process of demolition, clearance, and bridge construction, ensuring that the critical logistical arteries remained open for the movement of military traffic. This massive commitment of engineering resources diverted crucial assets from other vital operational theaters. The strategic importance of this reconstruction was immense. The rapid conversion and repair of the Polish rail network guaranteed that the massive resources consumed in the Polish campaign could be quickly replaced and redeployed to the Western Front. The successful logistics of the subsequent invasion of France were fundamentally dependent on the massive, systematic reconstruction effort in Poland. The German military's capacity for rapid, sustained maneuver was secured by the efficiency of this infrastructure reconstruction. The legacy of the infrastructure reconstruction remains a testament to the immense logistical demands of the Blitzkrieg. The German military, having suffered immense logistical friction in Poland, recognized the absolute necessity of a robust, fully functioning logistical base for continental warfare. The immense effort to rebuild the Polish infrastructure was the final initial investment that guaranteed the speed and success of the subsequent military campaigns. The military conquest of Poland immediately initiated a systematic, massive campaign of economic plunder, a transfer of wealth and resources designed to directly fuel the German Blitzkrieg engine and sustain the high operational demands of the subsequent Western campaigns. The rapid and ruthless exploitation of the Polish economy was a critical early component of the German logistical strategy. The core of the economic plunder was the seizure of industrial and agricultural assets. German administrations systematically took control of Polish factories, coal mines, and farms, diverting the immense output of these assets directly into the German military supply chain. The massive influx of raw materials, food, and industrial output provided a critical, immediate material offset to the high cost of the Polish campaign, and the necessary fuel for the rapid buildup of forces for the invasion of France. The plunder was a systematic act of economic warfare. The logistical impact of the plunder was immediate and profound. The captured Polish rail rolling stock, locomotives, and communication equipment were quickly integrated into the German logistical network, providing a necessary, immediate boost to the German transport capacity. This integration of captured logistical assets was a temporary but vital factor that allowed the German military to rapidly organize and transport the massive forces required for the subsequent invasion of Western Europe. The immense economic cost of the plunder was borne entirely by the Polish population. The systematic seizure of resources, coupled with the imposition of brutal rationing and forced labor policies, led to immediate, widespread hardship, starvation, and disease. The economic exploitation was a direct, ruthless execution of the ideological program, transforming the Polish population into a source of cheap labor and material wealth for the German war machine. The legacy of the economic plunder remains a grim testament to the ruthless strategic efficiency of the Nazi regime. The rapid exploitation of the Polish economy provided the necessary material foundation for the subsequent successes of the Blitzkrieg. The immediate and systematic plunder confirmed that the military victory was merely the precondition for a total war of economic and ideological subjugation. The tragedy of the invasion of Poland is defined by a profound moral paradox: the immense, unyielding courage of the Polish soldier, fighting against the overwhelming material and geopolitical inevitability of defeat. The Polish defense was a spectacular demonstration of human fortitude, but its ultimate failure was dictated by structural and technological factors that transcended individual bravery. The courage of the Polish soldier was absolute and unrelenting. The localized, fierce resistance, the devastating ambushes, and the systematic commitment to the defense of key strongholds inflicted higher casualties and consumed more German time and materiel than the German commanders had anticipated. The moral commitment to duty, exemplified by the defense of Westerplatte and the siege of Warsaw, remains an enduring symbol of national defiance. However, the inevitability of defeat was rooted in the structural imbalances of material and technology. The Polish army lacked the fundamental logistical capacity, the anti-tank firepower, and the air superiority necessary to counter the combined arms assault of the Blitzkrieg. The immense material superiority of the German panzers, coupled with the devastating effectiveness of the Luftwaffe, guaranteed the military collapse, regardless of the individual bravery of the Polish soldier. The moral paradox remains a powerful, poignant reminder that courage, though essential, is not the sole determinant of victory in modern warfare. The total industrial and logistical capacity of a nation dictates the strategic outcome. The immense sacrifice of the Polish soldier was the necessary moral foundation for the final total Allied commitment to the annihilation of the Nazi regime. The legacy of the moral paradox is a final, clear articulation of the strategic realities of total war. The immense human cost of the conflict was compounded by the structural imbalances that transformed the defense into a tragic, foregone conclusion. The courage of the Polish soldier remains an unassailable moral asset, but the strategic verdict was delivered by the superior industrial and logistical power of the German war machine. The invasion of Poland remains an event of immense strategic consequence, serving as the definitive blueprint for total war that would consume the continent for the next 6 years. The rapid, brutal conquest confirmed the new strategic paradigm and provided the immediate, chilling proof of the unprecedented scale and systematic brutality of the conflict to come. The enduring legacy is the confirmation of the Blitzkrieg model as the dominant, terrifying doctrine of modern mechanized warfare. The seamless synchronization of air and ground forces, the speed of the armored thrusts, and the effectiveness of the psychological shock provided the necessary template for the German conquest of Western Europe. The tactical success was a definitive statement of the new operational standard. The final legacy is the normalization of ideological terror and economic subjugation. The systematic war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and ruthless economic plunder that immediately followed the military conquest confirmed the existential nature of the conflict. The Polish campaign was the initial brutal stage of a war for total political and ideological restructuring, providing a chilling foreshadowing of the total scale of the conflict that would follow. The immense strategic cost of the Polish campaign, the human sacrifice, the logistical friction, and the political reordering of the continent defined the trajectory of the subsequent conflict. The structural flaws exposed in the German logistical chain were the seeds of ultimate defeat, but the strategic victory was the catalyst that ignited the global war. The invasion of Poland remains the final, unassailable strategic event that determined the beginning and the brutal, total nature of the conflict that followed.